Great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another edition of IRENA Insights webinar series. My name is Karan Kocher, and I'm joining from IRENA's Innovation and Technology Center in Bonn, Germany. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I would like to introduce IRENA and our webinar series. IRENA is an intergovernmental organization with 169 member countries and another 15 countries in their accession process. We support countries in their transition to a sustainable energy future and serve as a principal platform for international cooperation, a center of excellence, and a repository of policy, technology, resource, and financial knowledge on renewable energy. And because our analytical work and our engagement with our members generates a lot of valuable insights, we're constantly looking for ways to share those insights with you. And that is why we launched this webinar series. We have organized over 50 webinars on various topics, and you can check them all on our IRENA events website. The link to that will be in the presentation slides. We understand that there are many longer deep dive webinars out there, but our aim is to keep these webinars short and sweet, lasting approximately 30 minutes. While we cannot cover everything in this time frame, we hope that this gives you enough information and more than that, the resources of more in-depth information to help you explore further. So today, in the next 30 minutes, we will hear from Jaydev from IRENA and Hiet from the European Patents Office. They will share key conclusions from a joint publication between IRENA and EPO titled Offshore Wind Energy Patent Insights Report. But before I hand over the microphone to them, a few housekeeping items. The webinar will be recorded and posted on the IRENA events website. You are by default on mute, but we would encourage you to use the Q&A feature to ask any questions and chat amongst the different members of the audience. And without any further ado, let me welcome our panelists to the IRENA Insights webinar series. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Karan. If you could move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so thank you, Karan, and good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for attending this webinar. As mentioned by Karan, myself and Hiet are among the authors of this patent insight report on offshore wind energy. And I think to set the scene, I'd like to first present some trends that we see in the offshore wind sector from IRENA's perspective, and then I'll hand the floor over to my colleague Hiet, who will then provide more insights on the actual patent trends that are covered in the report. Next slide, please. So I'd just like to quickly set the scene regarding the energy transition. So essentially what we see in this graphic is that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that we comply with a 1.5 degree scenario. The figure on the left shows the commitments that were made in COP27, and what the IRENA scenario should be, which is represented by the blue line, and you can see there's a bit of a gap over there. Similarly, on the right, what you observe is the required amount of decarbonization that needs to take place between now and 2050 to actually comply with the 1.5 degree scenario as per IRENA's modeling. And that sort of is equivalent to removing about 36 gigatons of carbon dioxide between this time period. So a lot of work needs to be done. But however, we at IRENA, and I think this is also a sentiment echoed by EPO, believe that renewables will play a crucial role in achieving this goal. Renewables had a record year of having about 295 gigawatts of capacity added in 2022, which was an annual record. However, this capacity needs to triple and also promote energy efficiencies by a magnitude of double by 2030 in order to achieve this goal. And this tagline of tripling renewable energy and doubling energy efficiency was included in the COP28 declarations. So this is a sentiment that is also echoed by the international community. Next slide, please. So now, within the context of the energy transition, offshore wind is definitely playing an important role in this space. So according to our latest analysis, as of 2022, 63.2 gigawatts of global capacity was available for offshore wind in 2022. The competitiveness of offshore wind also has increased in the sense that there's been a reduction in the levelized cost of electricity by a magnitude of 59% between the period of 2010 and 2022. However, while these are positive trends, more needs to be done. And to be compliant with a 1.5-degree scenario, the capacities for offshore wind need to reach 494 gigawatts and 2,465 gigawatts by 2030 and 2050, respectively. So a lot of work has to be done, but with the right actions, this can be achieved. And with regards to the leading players in offshore wind, what we see from the market point of view, countries namely China, Denmark, Germany, Belgium, and the United Kingdom are leading the industry in this space. Next slide, please. I'd just also like to touch upon maybe some recent developments that have been taking place in the offshore wind space, and that's mainly regarding supply chain issues. Some of you may have seen in the newspaper that there have been some challenges that the supply chain has been experiencing, and it's really important that these challenges be addressed as the industry continues to develop. Some key, let's say, challenges that need to be addressed include the volatility in supply chains, which are ascribed to the auction designs and also sometimes component defects. There are still lingering effects with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic, which have increased capital costs and therefore also increased supply chain activities. These challenges have also resulted in high interest rates, so this makes it difficult to sometimes get access to financing for project developers, and also contributes then to fluctuating project costs when these developers are trying to plan out new projects, and therefore there's a bit of uncertainty moving forward. And finally, from a government point of view, there are many varying policy signals with regards to offshore wind development, and this can prevent an effective matching of supply and demand, and is a challenge that needs to be addressed. Next slide, please. So while there are challenges that are happening, that is not hampering innovation, and a particular innovation that is sort of taking center stage in the offshore wind space is actually the development of floating offshore wind, which is essentially characterized by sort of siting offshore wind turbines in very deep waters. And this is largely because at very large water depths, the capacity factor for offshore wind increases tremendously. So the technical potential for floating offshore wind is about 13 terawatts, which is more than sufficient to meet global energy supply demands moving forward. However, the operational capacity is still very small, with 270 megawatts as of 2022. But this is forecasted to increase as the sector matures. With regards to floating offshore wind, countries like Norway, UK, Japan, and China are leading the way. Most recently, Norway was able to operationalize their Hywind Tampen project, which is the largest floating offshore wind project in the world, with a capacity of 88 megawatts, and hopefully more efforts like this will be replicated in the future. So we expect that by 2030, the capacity for floating offshore wind would reach about 2 to 4 gigawatts, and obviously beyond that, continue to increase. The next slide, please. Yes. Now, also with regards to offshore wind, there's a great interest to see how this energy produced offshore can be utilized for various end-use applications. And one particular trend that's gaining a lot of traction is the coupling of offshore wind to hydrogen production, because again, hydrogen is also playing a very key role in the energy transition. And the reason again for this is because of the high capacity factors that are offered by offshore wind solutions. In the image on the left, you can see the various configurations by which an offshore wind farm and hydrogen production module can happen. So it can either happen where you have an offshore wind farm that is sited offshore and then connected to an electrolyzer onshore, or you can have the electrolyzer and the offshore wind farm sited offshore and then allow for the production of hydrogen, which can then be transported via pipelines or ships. And on the right, excuse me, you can see a table with some projects that are exploring this avenue. So countries like Germany, Netherlands, and Canada all have initiatives in this area. These are mainly fixed bottom offshore wind farms that are being used for hydrogen production, and there are efforts to look into how floating offshore wind can also contribute to this venture. Next slide, please. Yes. So, and also I'd like to maybe just touch upon a few ancillary considerations that should be factored in when looking into offshore wind. So the first is regarding grid infrastructure. So it's really important that effective infrastructure is in place to sort of allow for the transmission of power in the most effective way. And a key innovation that's sort of taking center stage is the utilization of high voltage direct current cables, mainly because of their ability to transmit large power loads and have less transmission losses in the space. And secondly, the concept of having energy islands, essentially as well, artificial islands which have the required grid infrastructure to transmit power onshore. So these are some innovations that are taking place in this area of grid infrastructure. And on the topic of port infrastructure, I make this point because floating offshore wind particularly relies on a stable and high capacity for ports to sort of be functional. And therefore, it's really important for governments and industry stakeholders to invest in making ports more capable to handle the assembly, the storage, and also the transport of floating offshore wind components to the project sites. And Wind Europe sort of estimated that in Europe alone, it would require euro 6.5 billion of values of investments up to 2030 to make ports ready for the future. So I just wanted to sort of stress this point. And then the final slide, at least for my segment, is sort of just some key high-level summaries that we have from our insights report. And then I think here to then obviously provide the data behind this. But what I would just like to share is that with regards to offshore wind, it is gaining traction in the energy transition. As I've hopefully presented very briefly, floating offshore wind is sort of the next innovative frontier that's being tackled, and its coupling with hydrogen is an innovative application that is being explored. And then there are other innovations to sort of improve the gearboxes that sort of are the driver for the offshore wind turbine by implementing direct drive solutions within these turbines to make them more efficient, and also improving undersea cable infrastructure to allow for better transmission. So these are some key high-level insights that our report has. And I think now I will hand the floor to my colleague Geert, who will now provide the more data analytical insights with regards to the basis for these findings. And thank you for your attention. And Geert, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jagdev, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for setting the industrial sign and how this technology that we have discovered in offshore wind energy is taken up by the industry and how it's being used all over the world. My name is Geert Boet. I work at the European Patent Office in Vienna. So I will be talking a little bit about how we came to the report, how we did our data aggregation, and what some of the main findings that we discovered in the report. Next slide, please. I like to start my first presentation, always with the first slide that gives this quote from Professor Edward Deming, who said, "Without data, you're just another person with an opinion." And next slide. To which Silverstone and Jones answered, "Well, without an opinion, you're just another person with data." Just to say that it is important when we do this kind of patent analytics to have a good understanding in what the data is about, how the data has been used, whether the data is complete. And once you know that the data is okay and it is what you're looking at, that you make the right conclusions and that you make basically the right opinions based on the data. So next slide, please. So the process that we used for creating this report is always with a basic search. And you could say from an easy point of view, we start a basic search, of course, with looking at offshore wind energy patents. We then continue to do a statistical analysis, which for this report were rather elementary, rather easy. We look at top applicants, we look at where patents have been filed, we look at inventors, we look at also various technologies that are being used in offshore wind energy. And once that is done, then of course we go to processing the results, publishing the report, providing also the background material, which becomes more and more important. And from there on, basically, we share our findings with the policymakers and with the outside world. Next slide, please. So you could say, of course, how did we get to looking at offshore wind energy? Well, if you want to find the patents in the field of offshore wind energy, it's fairly easy to use, for example, CPC or IPC classification codes. As you can see on the screenshot here, there is a specific CPC classification code only looking at offshore wind turbines. But this is not enough because not all patent offices publish their patents with specific this classification code. So next slide, please. And here you see a more detailed insight, in fact, on the main search strategy that we used to identify the patents that have been or that are relevant for offshore wind energy. For the report, we really tried to concentrate on offshore wind energy. There's a lot of overlap, of course, with normal wind energy or onshore wind energy. So we really looked at patents that are relevant for offshore wind energy. And for a couple of technologies, we had to move to wider concepts. Next slide, please. So when we looked at concepts, we know that we have started with a set of about 17,000 patents in offshore wind energy. And of course, if we say we have these patents, we want to divide this up in various technologies and various areas of various areas of technology. So one of those areas is, for example, the energy storage. What do you do with your surplus electricity when the wind is blowing, your turbines are running, but the electricity is not needed? Well, there are technologies being developed that allow you to store that surplus energy. And one of the technologies being used there is, of course, using the electricity to power electrolyzers. As we are sitting on sea, we have plenty of water. We can desalinate the seawater, and then we can use that desalinated water to produce hydrogen. Well, if you want to search for those patents, of course, we have to go and use then classification codes in combination with keywords to find specific patents in certain areas. So as you can see from the exploded view here, this is basically the query or the search strategy, like we call it, to look specific at patents with regards to energy storage and offshore wind energy. Next slide, please. Right, on this slide, you see an overview of all the various technologies and all the technology groups that we have been considering in the report. As you can see, and Jaidev already mentioned that we looked, for example, at fixed and floating foundations, so basically the platforms. We also looked at how the power is transmitted from the rotors to the generators, basically using a direct drive technology or gearbox technology. And we looked also at other aspects. So energy storage, you see there, for example, compressed air, kinetic, battery, hydrogen, and also thermal. So for each of those technological approaches or technological concepts, we developed individual search concepts. Those search concepts are shared in the report, they are shared in the data, and each of those concepts is specified by a code. Basically, what you see there on the slide is you see, for example, Q0 is used for offshore wind energy. If we want to look at hydrogen, you have to use QD4, and then you will find the strategy that we have used to identify hydrogen-related patterns on offshore wind energy. Next slide, please. Right, so these are the three areas we will have a closer look at: floating technology, floating platforms, mechanical power transmission, and energy storage on hydrogen. Next slide, please. Okay, so as a start, what did the patterns show us when we simply looked at offshore wind energy? Well, as you can see on this graph, is that there was up to 2013, there was basically a steady increase in the number of filings related to offshore wind energy. This started in 2005 with probably with the Kyoto Protocol, or under influence of a policy decision. We had the Kyoto Protocol, and that basically was a serious kickoff to any of the green energy technologies being further developed. In 2013, we saw a stagnation, and then from 2017 onwards, we saw again a strong increase in number of patent filings, and this strong increase can be attributed basically to the number of filings made by Chinese applicants and also in China. So this is really something that struck us, was I would nearly call it a tsunami, and an incredible amount of patents that have been filed by China. Next slide, please. If we look at the applicant ranking, we see that established companies like Vestas, like Siemens, like General Electric are there. The patterns the graph we're looking at here, you see that there is a red color and a gray color, and the red color are patents that have been filed in multiple countries. We call this international patents. The gray part is the part of the patents that have only been filed in the country of the applicant. So if you look, for example, at Siemens and at Vestas, so the first and the fourth one in the graph, you'll see that those two companies put an enormous attention also to not only filing their patents in Denmark and Germany, but that they really try to have their IP protected in other countries than the country where the applicant is based. If we look, for example, at the Chinese applicants, we see the Power China Guangdong Engineering Corporation and One Clean Energy Research Institute. You see that the number of patents that they file outside China is basically minimal in compared to what they file inside China. And then, of course, you see Siemens Gamesa, which is the Spanish leg of Siemens, filing mainly, mainly international patent filings. Next slide, please. One of the also trends that we observed was that until 2010, we saw a substantial number of what we call individual or persons filing patent applications. And then in 2010, 2011, this gradually changed by having less and less physical persons filing patents, and this trend being taken over by companies. You can say up to 2010, 2011, you have persons like Alois Wobben and Hendrik Stiesdal. You could call them the Bill Gates and the Steve Jobs of the wind energy, that were very prominent represented, in fact, in these patent filings. So we see some kind of a consolidation happening where individual patent applicants are not so much in the picture anymore. They're still there, but not as strong as what was before 2010. So you could say it's a form of a consolidation happening there. The sector, the industry becomes more and more capital intensive, and that of course is reflected in less and less individual natural persons being registered as the applicant, and more companies. Hendrik Stiesdal, for example, went to work for Siemens and so on. So we see that kind of shift happening. Next slide, please. Yeah, what we see here in this representation is the international cooperation. So this is also something that we look at in the patent data, because international cooperation for us is a proxy to know whether or not the risks of going into a certain technology have to be shared with, for example, other companies based in other countries. One of the findings there we had was that France had the highest number of patent families with international cooperation. That means there was a French applicant together working with another applicant. In this case, of course, we see a very strong link between France and Spain, for example, on the bottom right side. But we also can look, for example, at what the United States is doing. US had the most diverse cooperation picture, so with the highest number of other countries they work together with. And then, for example, with China, we saw a clear link also with co-applications with Denmark. Of course, Denmark is a very strong nation when it comes to offshore wind energy, but also Hong Kong and Chinese Taipei. Next slide, please. Yeah. So what we see on this graph is the number of grants related to the number of patent filings. We're talking here about the international patent filings, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And we see that the average, if you look at the orange bar or the orange line, that the average lays around 60%. You could say that that means basically that patents being filed in offshore wind energy, about 60% is being granted. At the end, from 2017, 2018, you see this decline. This decline is not the number of patents being granted. It simply means that those patents are still in a stage of being examined, and that the granting has not taken an effect yet. In fact, you could say these are the so-called patents pending. Yeah. So this is a slightly higher percentage than what we see in general for patents being granted, which is again a good measure of patent quality and the economical importance of this industry and this technology. Next slide. So what you see on this slide is a consolidation again of the number of applicants. On the x-axis, you can see the number of applicants. On the highest part we had in 2012, there were 700 different applicants filing patents in offshore wind energy, with a steady increase between 2002 and 2012. We have seen on the previous graphs that in 2012 there was this decline in the number of patent filings, but we also see that there is a decline also in the number of applicants. Sorry, in 2012 there's no decline yet, but past 2012 we see 2014, 2015, 16, 17, a slight decline in the number of patent filings, but more important, we see also a decline in companies that are filing patents. From 2017 onwards on, we see again an increase in patents being filed, but the number of applicants does not go up anymore. That means for us there is some form of consolidation happening in the industry, and this consolidation is still an upgoing trend, in fact, because we see again a growth from 2018 onwards. But again, we know that this growth is mainly attributed to Chinese applicants filing patents in China. Next slide, please. On this slide, you see now we're looking basically at some of the various technologies that we have been looking at. Here you see the energy storage applications, or let's say the technologies. On the bottom left side, you see that we have there search strategies for compressed air, kinetic, battery, hydrogen, and thermal. And on the right side, you can see the top applicants for the various technologies. So this is one of the graphs that we have in the report, and also in the data, which you then can basically look into depth. Where are certain applicants filing in what kind of sector, in what kind of country? Next slide, please. So we looked at energy storage. We also had a closer look at floating foundations. What is the evolution of floating foundations? Where are the main applicants sitting? We see the same trend again as what we saw with offshore wind energy, this kind of dip between 2012, 2017, which then again increases. Observe here, for example, when you look on the right side to the top applicants, that the majority part of the applicants are based in Europe. And we can also see that systematically over the, basically they're based in Europe. Yeah, next slide, please. And in this slide, we had a closer look at the power transmission systems. Jaydev already mentioned this. There are two technologies being used. One we call direct drive, and the other is where the generator is being driven over a gearbox. In offshore wind technology, of course, it's important that you minimize the number of people that you need to send out to maintain those turbines. And therefore, the direct drive is the preferred method in offshore wind energy. And we can see that from 2016 onwards, that the majority of the patents, let's say 2/3 of the patents being filed in mechanical power transmission technology is related to direct drive. We know that direct drives have to make use of generators which use rare earth materials, or rare earth metals as well. And one of the main producers there is China, or one of the places where you find a lot of these metals are China. And we can also see that reflected, in fact, in the number of patent applications coming from China. Yeah, next slide, please. Right. So, this was basically that. This is an overview of the countries, the top patenting countries where patents are being filed with regards to power transmission. And there we see Denmark, US, Germany, Japan being in the lead. And again, you can see on the dark gray, on the dark orange bar, that the mechanical power transmission is the main technology being used. Next slide, please. So when we look at patent data, sometimes we find this kind of outliers, which initially we think are wrongly or misplaced. So one of the technologies that we discovered with offshore wind energy was, for example, aquaculture. When we analyze patents, we do some kind of data quality check. And when we see things that are out of line, we simply look at, but what is this doing here? And we saw a substantial number of patents in the aquaculture. We put that in the report as well, but we have seen the combination basically of aquaculture technology with offshore wind energy, which of course makes sense. If you think further that you need to have communication with your platform, you need to have communication with your aquaculture plants, you need to have energy, etc., etc. So basically, this was let's say, I would not say a fait divers we discovered, but it was an interesting, not artifact. It was interesting to see these two technologies being combined. Next slide, please. And that brings me to, I think, the last slide from my side. You will find the full report on the EPO webpage, but also on the IRENA webpage. The data is available. What I explained before with regards to the various search strategies, they are also documented. You get the data in an Excel sheet. So basically, we are fully transparent about how we have done, what the methodology is, what the data is behind it. And if you have a need to further drill down into the data, you can do it. But there is also a Tableau worksheet published where you can very easily, with click and drag and drop, create your own insights or discover your own insights based on offshore wind energy. And I think that brings us to the end of the presentation. I'll happily leave it over to the moderator.
Thank you, Jaydev and Geert, for your presentation. I think we only have a couple of minutes left for the Q&A instead of the intended 10 minutes, but I think this reflects more on the depth of the research that was covered in this report. So thank you for sharing that. We might be able to take one question that we received from the audience, and that is directed towards you, Geert, if you can please help us. So this person asked that, we are seeing so many patents filed for offshore wind energy. How do we know which patents are valuable, and how does this lead to deployment? If you could please share some of your insights on this.
Yeah, how to know which patents are of a higher value? Well, one of the things that we did there was develop the concept of an international patent filing. So when we see that the applicant files its patent in various number of countries, then we know that the applicant or the inventors and the applicants want to protect that IP in a number of countries or in a multiple number of countries. That means that there is some kind of a business model behind it, some kind of an intention to commercialize a certain technology and basically generate money out of it. That's what it comes down to. So patent families, we call this the patent family size, is one of the indicators that we use to indicate to find valuable patents. Also, of course, as I mentioned, international cooperations between applicants is also a proxy for value of patents.
Great. Thanks, Yash. Unfortunately, our time for today is up. I would like to thank our panelists, Jaydev and Hiet, for the time and for sharing their knowledge and insights on their latest work. I would also like to especially thank the audience for joining us, taking out the time, and for your attention and the questions. We hope you learned something new. The recording and the slides will be posted on IRENA events website for those who missed any part of the webinar. And I wish you a great rest of the day, and we hope to see you soon in the upcoming webinars. Thank you.